Jazeera.com. Okay, let's go back to our top story now. That's the crisis in Ukraine, where pro-Russia demonstrators have declared a People's Republic in one city in the east. Well, Lincoln Mitchell is a consultant who works on politics and business in the former Soviet Union and an advisor to the Human Rights Institute at Columbia University. He joins us live now from New York. Sir, thank you so much for joining us here on Al Jazeera. I guess perhaps the fact that Russia made moves towards Crimea was not a surprise necessarily, but how do you view these the latest developments in the east of Ukraine?
This doesn't seem like an enormous surprise, because for Russia, had they just secured Crimea and kind of let the rest of Ukraine go, what they would have ended up with was a Ukraine that was kind of unambiguously going to move towards the west, and they can't have that. So there's reason to think that what's happening in eastern Ukraine today is being pushed along by Russia to create a rationale, albeit a flawed one and a faulty one and a dishonest one, for further Russian incursion into Ukraine, and that is a very, very serious thing.
Well, it certainly echoes what the Secretary of State John Kerry said. He said the events there do not appear to be spontaneous. And then we also heard from the White House spokesman saying that there would be consequences if Russia continued to act in this way. But ultimately, what consequences could there really be?
Well, I think the biggest consequences should come from the Ukrainian people, right? And occupies it in some significant way, or seeks to occupy it. I would think that they would face a very strong insurgency from the Ukrainian people who don't want their country occupied. Whether or not they're generally sympathetic to Russia, whether they speak Ukrainian or Russian, if the Ukrainian state exists, then the people there are going to resist this. And Ukraine is not a small country, nor is it a sparsely populated one. So the biggest consequence for Russia could well be an insurgency that they cannot handle, that is made by and from Ukrainian people. And if that happens, it is certainly imaginable that the West would support that insurgency in one way or another.
Well, the one way or another is quite a detail there, because we heard from the Czech Prime Minister saying that basically, should Russia invade Ukraine, then NATO should mobilize and put boots on the ground there. Do you ever see a scenario where that would happen?
I think that's very unlikely that NATO would actually put boots on the ground in Ukraine, but there are other ways to support that insurgency. There are ways to get material support to that insurgency. There's ways to help with communication, to help with logistics. There's ways to show signs of NATO strength on the borders, on the eastern borders of NATO. So those are all things that we could see. Now, is that going to stop Russia from doing this? You know, we don't know. But is it going to make it easy for Russia? No, I don't think this will be easy for Russia. And I would add that if folks in the Kremlin haven't figured that out yet, then they're really underestimating or misestimating Ukraine, unless they're not. Unless the people of eastern Ukraine want to be part of Russia. Now, I don't believe that to be the case, but we're going to see whether that's true or not in the next few weeks.
Do you think that perhaps the European Union, mainly, rather than the West, kind of miscalculated it way at the beginning when the protests started in Ukraine, that this Russian reaction is in itself a reaction to what was perceived as a sort of moving in of the EU into Ukraine?
The main thing, I mean, yes, from the very beginning, I mean, going back for years, there's been a hesitancy on the part of the EU and even from NATO to recognize that moving the EU and NATO eastward is something that is viscerally Russia does not like. So I don't think people have really internalized that. But in the more recent past, the support for the Euromaidan movement and what was a complicated political evolution, a political development in Ukraine, which the West interpreted as a democratic event, full stop, in which the demonstrators should be supported, that created more tension with Russia than was necessary. On the other hand, in my view, that does not at all legitimize what Russia did in Crimea, nor what Russia may do in eastern Ukraine in the next few days.
Lincoln Mitchell, advisor to the Human Rights Institute at Columbia University. Sir, thank you for sharing your views with us.
Thank you for having me.
An Australian ship has detected more signals from what is suspected to be the data recorders from the missing Malaysian